Wangusha Mpagi, and here from the studios of NTV, we interrupt normal programming to bring you a special report on the launch of the Uganda Business Impact Survey 2020 done by the United Nations Capital Development Fund in collaboration with the Government of Uganda, Makerere University, the Uganda Revenue Authority, and the European Union. This afternoon, we have the honor to have with us here doing things the new normal way under COVID-19. We have an in-studio panel and a presentation and the launch. We also have online audiences and other audiences, those of you watching us live on TV, who will be joining us and sharing with us some of your comments to feed into the panel discussion that we'll have shortly after. I would like to introduce Ministers here, the Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Commerce, the Honorable Amelia Chambade. Very nice to have you. She will be doing the launch honors in a few minutes. We also have with us from the UNCDF, Dr. Dmitry Pozdaev. Very nice to have you, sir. We have we have with us also on the front row here, Mr. Gideon Badagawa. Gideon Badagawa doesn't need a lot of introduction, from the Private Sector Foundation Uganda. I have with me from the Uganda Revenue Authority, I have Millie I. Nalukwago. She's Assistant Commissioner, Research, Planning and Development. Millie, very nice to have you. I have from Nucafe, I hope that's how it's pronounced, Nucafe, Mr. Joseph Nkandu, who is the Executive Director. Joseph, very nice to have you. I have from Makerere University, Mr. Yusuf Chiwala, lectures at COBAMS. Very nice to have you, and you're the co-author of the report with Dimitri. Will be presenting it to us. And I have with me also, let me introduce the last person I have. Alonso, I did not jump you on purpose, but Alonso is from the European Union. Very nice to have you, sir. May I take the honor to invite the Honorable Minister to come and make brief opening remarks, and then I'll invite Dimitri to take us into the report together with Dr. Chiwala. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Head of Office, United Nations Capital Development Fund, Uganda, Mr. Dmitry Pozdaev, and UNCDF team, representative of EU delegation, representative Embassy of Sweden, not here, in absentia, is he here? Representative from Makerere, representative from Revenue Authority, and representatives from different organizations, representative of Nucafe, all protocol, and the Private Sector Foundation, all protocol observed. Well, I'd like to express our sincere appreciation to UNCDF, COBAMS, and URA for being proactive in conducting and sponsoring this novel study. It was indeed a pleasant surprise when I got this study. And I'd like to thank the private sector as respondents for having availed us a sufficient base for government interventions with their valuable input as well as responses. This study has come in timely when countries almost across the globe are devising strategies for economic recovery after COVID-19. Government has already constituted a post-COVID-19 economic recovery high-level committee by the President to develop strategies of mitigating the impact of COVID-19. Therefore, the study findings and recommendations will inform on the appropriate policy actions during recovery. As you may have observed, during the lockdown, the BUBU policy has cushioned the economy through the reliable supply and access of essential commodities. This has been so because many of these essential commodities, like maize flour, sugar, detergents, cooking oil, soap, rice, among others, are produced in Uganda. So I call upon the private sector to embrace BUBU for import substitution and also leap from government procurement. I have read the findings and policy recommendations of the study, especially on the impact of the lockdown on revenues and cash flows of the businesses, workforce, attendance and layoffs, impact on exports, and cost of raw materials, among others. I also note your recommendations, especially the need of a national dialogue and consultations involving the business community and other stakeholders, the need for long-term solutions towards business sustainability beyond the pandemic, and the need for government programs that will keep the trade flowing through the transport corridors, even when pandemics or other shocks hit. These findings are really paramount and will inform government on the appropriate policy reforms and strategies to ensure that the private sector continues to thrive and lead to economic growth. The Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives is committed to continue working with UNCDF, the private sector, development partners, and other stakeholders, all the other agencies, and all the other sectors of government, to ensure that the findings and the recommendations of the study are further discussed, aligned, and mainstreamed in the policy and planning processes of the sector. I would once again like to thank UNCDF and other partners, private sector, MDAs, Uganda Revenue Authority, and other stakeholders who ensure that this study is accomplished. I therefore launch, do I launch it now or later? Later? Later. So I thank you so much, listeners, for listening to me. Thank you very much. So I declare the meeting open. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for your brief remarks there. And the BUBU policy the Minister is talking about is the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda policy, which is emphasizing local production. The President calls it import substitution, and he's been emphasizing that, and it's come under a lot of tests now during this lockdown when movement globally is extremely constrained. I wanted to just take the moment to introduce properly Mr. Adolfo Alonso, who's the European Union, from the European Union delegation in Uganda. He is Finance and Agribusiness Program Manager. Adolfo, very nice to have you. Thank you. I'd like to invite Dr. Dmitry Pozdaev, who is the head of UNCDF office in Uganda and regional advisor for Southern and Eastern Africa, to come make very brief remarks, just like the minister did. And then I would ask you to also introduce your colleague, Dr. Chiwala, again, and present the report to us, because the minister needs to launch this report, but we need the minister to join us in the discussion of the report after it has been presented to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and good day to all our viewers and listeners. I would like to thank the Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives for her guidance and support that we have received from the Ministry. I would like to mention our partners, of course, the College of Business and Management Sciences of Makerere University and the Uganda Revenue Authority, who have made this study possible, as well as to acknowledge the European Union, which co-financed the actual conduct of this study. My colleague, Dr. Yusuf Chovala, and myself will walk you through the key findings and recommendations of this report. Of course, after the minister has so ably summarized the key findings, there is not much work for us left, but we will try to delve into some specific aspects that will give you a better idea of the scope of the report, as well as of the particular issues that have been investigated and the particular recommendations that are coming from what we have heard from the business community in Uganda. So without further ado, allow me to give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Chavala.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you, Dimitri. Without taking time, I want to immediately go through the report. This report focuses on the impact of COVID-19 on Ugandan micro, small, and medium enterprises. Why are we interested in micro, small, and medium enterprises? Because these category of businesses contribute up to 75% of the value of goods and services of this economy. In other words, the GDP. So they take a large share of contribution to the GDP for this economy. That's why we're too much interested. And who are these? Why I'm saying who are these, which sectors are they? It's 49% in service sector, 33% in commerce and trade, 10% manufacturing, 8% in other fields. But the micro enterprises, the M, form 93% out of the 100 of these firms. And that means these firms have a lot of contribution in terms of jobs, in terms of revenue to our economy, and in terms of survival for the people who depend on these micro enterprises, in terms of food, in terms of taking their kids to school, in terms of support to medical. Those who depend on this sector are very many. And that it means then that if these are neglected, the impact goes to the wider economy in terms of GDP. Okay? Right to the findings. Before the findings, how did we take on this study, or how did we study this? Because these firms are both in the informal sector and also the formal sector. We used two approaches. We used an econometric modeling for the firms in the informal sector using past data collected by WUBOS. And we also ran a very rapid survey of about 2 weeks for the firms that actually we call the formal, that are in the formal sector. And these are the firms, we use the databases of Uganda Revenue Authority where they are registered. So that helped us to target all of them, both formal and informal, both micro, small, and large. Okay? So what are these findings? What do we see in the findings from the business community, but also the findings for those firms that are micro and informal? One, we see that because of COVID, the impact of COVID, because the consumers are home, the consumers, the businesses cannot easily get them. Because of the lockdown, the transportation is not easy for these companies. We see that the liquidity or the cash flow in this business has actually dropped. We estimate about 15% of these firms that can sustain on their own cash flow for about 3 months. About 85% cannot. And that shows how fragile these small businesses are. And we should not ignore them. Another important aspect here is that when you look at the trends of COVID, COVID-19 is so speedy in terms of impact on the healthcare, on the business community. So the question then is, at this speed, shall we see the recovery? How shall we see the recovery if the speed at which these businesses have gone down has been so high. How shall we be able to have these firms recover on a relatively much speedier way? So that's something we need to talk about. Now, regarding the informal sector, the businesses in the informal sector are tied to the individuals in these sectors. You cannot easily separate a business from its owners. Now, our estimation in the modeling, we see that about 50% of these businesses, because of COVID impact, are going to run out of business. They're actually going to close shop. That's how bad it is. Okay? That's how bad it is, because many have eaten the capital. Okay? They've been surviving the same amount of money because their capital is so small. So they're very fragile. Okay? We also, in terms of revenue, we see that 91% of these companies, okay, are going, in terms of revenue, will not make the revenue they raised compared to last year. And more so specific, that about 80% of this drop, okay, shall go to the extent of 10% compared to last year. What does that mean? For URA and government that has taxes that target the sales or invoices of these companies, you just estimate more than 10% of that loss is going to come to government, having seen how many these are and their contribution to the economy. So that contribution and how large they are will have the impact on the revenue of the country. Another important issue to emphasize here is other sectors, because that is important. Who is the loser and who is the winner? In the formal sector, we see the culture, entertainment, and accommodation much affected. We see transport and communication much affected. We see trade and we see manufacturing much affected because of the social distancing, because of the lockdowns. And in the informal sector, we see 46% highest in the informal sector. Manufacturing is highly affected compared to other sectors. Then definitely hospitality is affected. That looks close to what is happening to the formal sector. And then trading and services are also highly affected, 41%. Now, looking at these businesses whose liquidity has gone down, these businesses whose revenue has gone down, and so the revenue of the country, we see workers sitting back home. But what is most worrying is that 62% of the businesses are considering layoffs. Apart from the lockdown having workers stay home, some firms, these categories, 62% are considering what? Layoffs. So the socio-economic implication then is when people are laid off, that means unemployment, and unemployment bites into consumption and bites into livelihoods. And that's how bad it is. We estimate about, in the informal sector, 4.4 million informal sector workers, okay, are going to drop below the poverty line. We know that our country has been trying to do a lot to see that individuals and households get out of poverty. But the impact of COVID is pushing, in the informal sector, 4.4 million workers in the informal sector. We estimated 100,000 jobs lost in the formal sector. And in terms of location, the north and the southwest, Uganda, will have the biggest impact of COVID in terms of layoffs and jobs. And Kampala, in terms of informal sector jobs, leads the rest of the country in terms of loss of what? Jobs in the informal sector. Another section of the findings is to do with the cost of doing business. We found out from the business community that we see that the firms we surveyed, over 30% of the cost of input has increased. The farms that are largely affected are manufacturing, supply of utilities, and for a clear reason. These manufacturing use intermediate goods, which many of these goods, especially utilities, are imported here. Now, when the rest of the world has closed shop, the cost of inputs for these farms is going to go up. And that cost of input is ultimately going to be reflected in the prices, okay, to the final consumer eventually. We also see that the sectors affected, once again, real estate, sports and entertainment, 38%, and agriculture in terms of cost of doing business. Regarding export, because of COVID, we know very well that transport, cross-border transport is a challenge. And the feedback we get from the business community shows that 63% of the companies, okay, the export volume shall reduce by 63%. And we also see by sector, the hardest hit is the private education institution. We export knowledge to the rest of the world, okay? So these are the hardest hit. That is about 91%. And also we see, we export information technology and services to other countries. This is hit by 70%. And then we also see a drop in export in other sectors like agriculture, where export is affected by 65%. Social work and health affected by 65%. And then trade and transport. Okay. But companies, micro, small, and medium enterprises are not seated back. A challenge when it comes, innovations emerge. What we see from the survey is that 40% of the companies have gone online as a measure to keep them in what? In business. What are the areas? They're using telephone communication, they are using information technology, they are using innovative procurement systems and supply channels, they are using door-to-door delivery, okay, as measures to help them cope. Now, in terms of sector, we expected that the education and health sector that has high potential to use digital means, okay, should be at such a moment leading in terms of compliance, but also in terms of survival by using technology. But our estimates show that we have to do a lot around these sectors. Education sector is only using 23%, and health is only using 30%. Now, the most affected, which is actually accommodation and catering, are also using only up to 35%. They can do better. So if the new way is actually to go online, I think there's room for these businesses to venture through that line. But the finding shows that it works for those that are surviving, okay? Although the usage is still minimal, okay? But also the business environment. You know, COVID came, and we saw, as a result of health measures, we see a lot of fear, anxiety in the business environment. We see a lot of optimism. We see a lot of, and that affects investment. Okay, that one has been thinking about investment. We see that our study shows that because of the feelings of concern and anxiety, the most pessimistic industries include those that have invested or require a lot of capital investment, and those that are in mining and quarrying, and then those that are in social services. And then we also see that the less capital intensive industries the investors there are more optimistic of a better future. And these sectors are largely in information and communication technology. Health is also optimistic. Financial industry is also optimistic. So given that nature of feeling in a business environment, we have also, we try to find out from this business community, government has already put in place measures, okay, to help them cope with the COVID. And they wanted to understand, how do they appreciate these measures? The two most appreciated business relief measures, according to this survey, one is extension of loan terms and reduction of financing cost. This, they agree to the extent of 67%. And then the other that follows that was most appreciated, is the extension of the tax payment. Okay? The tax payment deadlines by Uganda Revenue Authority. Those, in terms of percentage, those who appreciate are also 67%. And then the least appreciated is the suspending of payments for utilities and loan interest. That was seen at 43% of the respondents we talked to. Now, about recovery, because I will talk about these challenges and risks, we also ask a question about recovery. What is it going to be like? And the figures from our respondents show us that, to a large extent, 70% of the business estimate their recovery to take more than 3 months. Okay, 70% of these businesses. And then we also see that the most affected sectors in terms of recovery is accommodation and catering, supply of utilities, for the reason that these depend on much of the imports like plastic, see, real estate, then the financial industry, okay, and then the manufacturing, okay, and the tourism industry is expected, according to the responses, to recover the slowest and will take more than a year. That is what we find from these findings here. Now, the informal sector are expected to actually rebound mostly within 3 months, because I noted these are a bit flexible, okay? Given an intervention, they can easily compare to those other large businesses. Those are the key findings we highlight from this report regarding the challenges that the impact of COVID has. But one aspect maybe before Dimitri comes in to emphasize is the issue of inequality in these businesses. We should not take these businesses as uniform. The impact has hit them differently, and that is very important. But also the speed of this impact. In 1 month, you see this nature of damage. Okay? While we think about the health sector, let's think about this business being put on drip to recover. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor, and let me take it from here. By the way, you can access the full text of the survey report on the UNCDF website. I hope our NTV colleagues will be able to show the link to you so that you can, unless you have done so already, then you can access the full text and to go and view the findings and recommendations. Now I'm going to what we heard from the business community in terms of their proposals and suggestions as to how the impact of COVID-19 can be mitigated and what should be done for recovery. There is a caveat here. Be faithfully relay what we have heard from businesses. It does not mean we agree with everything. You know, like they write in Twitter profiles that retweet does not mean endorsement. So we are retweeting the voices of the businesses, but it does not mean automatic endorsement. But there are four key general conclusions coming from businesses, and we are very much in agreement with those. So one is that businesses need to be put back in operation as soon as possible. This is an obvious point. The longer, and Yusuf has already described, the structural weakness of most Ugandan businesses, the longer they stay out of operation, the more difficult it becomes for them to resume their activities. The second general conclusion is that Uganda needs a proper relief and economic stimulus package. We are dealing at the moment with a number of measures introduced by various government agencies, by various financial institutions, but these are not coordinated. And there is no overall framework that would allow an overview of the measures that are being taken to both mitigate and accelerate the recovery. Thirdly, and the Honorable Minister has mentioned that, businesses feel very strongly that there is a need for a national dialogue or national consultations with their direct participation. What the businesses are telling us is, don't do anything for us without us. Involve us in this process. We need our voice to be heard and to be taken into account. And this is one of the reasons that today's panel also includes a representative from the business community, from a company, but also an umbrella organization such as the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda. The next general idea, and I personally like it very much because it, in my opinion, it shows the responsibility and, if you wish, foresightedness of Ugandan businesses. What they tell us is that any solutions taken now should not be about short-term fixes, but they should look towards business sustainability beyond the pandemic. And the government, as well as businesses, should look at this as an opportunity to prepare, for example, for the African Continental Free Trade Area. Rescue packages should be linked to upgrading businesses, for example, adding local value, decreasing reliance on imported inputs, developing and adopting standard certification, technology upgrades, and other measures, including, for example, as the minister has mentioned it, keeping trade flowing through transport corridors, even under adverse conditions. Now, specific measures that the businesses suggest cover 4 broad areas. I will explain some of them, will not go through all of them. Again, I hope there will be a link to the report and you will read through that section. But the one big area, and I believe about 70% of all recommendations that we have received target that area, is about financial relief. And there are 2 big sub-sectors or sub-areas within that big area. One is fiscal support, and the other one is financial support. Fiscal support is aiming primarily at minimizing the tax burden. And there are various proposals in this respect, like introducing tax holidays, some blanket tax exemption for a period of time from 3 to 6 months for certain industries. In particular, as you can imagine, industries are advocating for these measures for themselves. But in particular, importers of medical supplies and equipment suggest that they should be exempt from tax. It is reschedule of tax payment dates and introducing grace periods, and I know that the Ugandan Revenue Authority is working in that respect, and we expect our colleague to talk about what they are doing later. It is suspension of NSSF payments. That's another measure that is suggested. Downward revision of tax rates. I know it will not go easily with URA, but this is what businesses are talking about. They also suggest some monetary measures which border in between fiscal and financial, like, for example, reducing further the central bank rate and thus improving the availability of credit to businesses. But in terms of direct financial support, businesses are talking about access to concessional loans. And of course, there are various ideas about the tenors and grace periods and the actual interest rate of those loans. There are strong voices in favor of capping loan interests throughout the financial industry. And of course, this will not go easy with our financial sector, that's understood. There are proposals to focus specifically on the needs and liquidity availability for micro, small, and medium enterprises through the establishment of a specialized small business recovery fund. And again, as we have heard very recently from the permanent secretary to the Treasury, at MOFPED, the government is now considering recapitalization of the Uganda Development Bank for exactly that purpose. The second big area that businesses have their opinions about concerns employment protection and employment generation. So again, there are proposals about direct financial support to companies employing the youth in an attempt to address in the longer term also the need to productively engage young men and women. So the proposal is for the government to open government projects to the youth after the pandemic, especially the Operation Wealth Creation, Youth Livelihood Program, NUSAF, and such like. There are various proposals to generate community engagement through labor-intensive projects by the government, but also increased support to the existing business community at the local level through saving and credit cooperative sectors. Also helping them to get access to more liquidity and then to own land through soft lending to local businesses to help them to recover. There are proposals about extending a relief package to SMEs, including a provision for covering at least 70% of wages and salaries during this period. The government is urged to address the issue of unpaid outstanding bills for government contracts and government suppliers. That would be a big relief to the companies and would provide them with the much needed cash to be able to resume their operations. And now go into the last big area, which concerns sustainable economic development and business resilience. Again, this is something that is looking into the future, not into the immediate impact, but measures that would help improve the resilience of Ugandan businesses and cope with any future eventualities, such as the one that we are facing today. So measures to reduce reliance on imported inputs and materials. And of course, the BUBU policy that has been mentioned here several times is very instrumental in this respect. But then providing additional advantages and supporting investments in manufacturing enterprises and offering government subsidies to procurement of machinery to enhance and strong industrial base in Uganda is one of the proposals that is voiced by businesses. Efforts should be made to transition to local raw materials where possible and focus on local value addition, particularly in manufacturing, again, to reduce dependence on imported goods. The government should consider protecting the small and medium enterprises by emphasizing the local content. And we know that the parliament is working on a series of legislation in that respect. Even, yes. Yes, it was, I believe it was passed yesterday, wasn't it? Oh, yes, thank you. So that businesses and particularly small and medium enterprises are protected even after the pandemic crisis. The second big block of proposals concerns support to emerging companies, startups, and innovations. Again, there is an issue of competition between foreign companies and domestic companies, and you can see it throughout the proposals of business. I personally believe that we would need to find a balance there, because competition is a good thing in principle, theoretically. In practice, it is not always the case. So how to find that middle ground where we can nurture the emerging domestic enterprises and industries without fully removing the incentives for competition is one of the issues that needs to be addressed. Cooperatives and cluster businesses should be encouraged and prioritized with incentives and promotion. Small startup companies with revenues below 1 billion Ugandan shillings that align with the BUBU policy or are majorly export-oriented or engaged in substitution of import goods should be entitled to sustainable tax breaks and lenient tax brackets. On innovation, we hear voices from business about an innovation fund that would help businesses to design, develop, test, introduce, and take to scale different innovations. And one of the proposals here is also to reduce the barriers to acquisition of IT infrastructure, both hardware and software, with a minimum or no VAT withholding tax, and to improve access to information and data, and stimulate development of the IT sector. Special attention should be given to small and medium enterprises. And again, the idea that I have mentioned before of a special facility for SMEs is there, not only in the context of recovery, but also going forward and supporting them as the backbone of the economy. As Yusuf has shortly mentioned before me, 90% of all enterprises in Uganda are small and medium enterprises. And the innovation aspect of it also includes e-trading and other channels of e-applications for businesses, in particular policies for recognition, licensing, and regulation. of online trading, as well as other e-channels of business supply and business marketing. So this is in a nutshell the recommendations stemming from this survey. And again, please go to the UNCDF website, read the report in detail. There are many more details which naturally we couldn't cover during this very short presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Dmitry Pozdaev from UNCDF and Dr. Chiwala from Makerere University for sharing with us the details of this report. The many reports that are beginning to come out studying the business environment and the economy during this period of COVID-19. Many people will ask the question to Dr. Pozdaev and Dr. Chiwala, what are you telling us that is new, because we are living this? The people in these companies, the people, both the owners and managers of the companies and the businesses and the people they employ are living through this, but put together, and especially for government, to question what kind of interventions that will be put in place, and even the businesses themselves, what are they trying to do to survive through these experiences. Of course, like Dr. Pozdaev has told us, the link should be up. We should be able to pick the link from the scroll on your TV so that you can open the report, read it in detail, and be able to engage with us here. And you can also join us or send us comments and questions. Yeah, the link is on the screen, on your TV screen. You can also share with us your views, ask questions on the following hashtags. COVID Impact Uganda, COVID Impact Uganda, at UNCDF INU, that is at UNCDF INU, DINU in Uganda. You can also join us at MTIC-Uganda or at Amelia AKYAMB. I think that's the hashtag for the handle for the Honorable Minister. You could join us and put questions, engage with us as we discuss this report. The report is assessing is Uganda Business Impact Survey 2020, Impact of COVID-19 on Formal Sector, Small and Medium Enterprises, just like has been presented. I have some questions I'd like to put, both to the people who did the survey and to the other members that we have on the panel. I would like to take just a minute to introduce my panel in fuller detail than I had done at the beginning. So Dr. Dmitry Pozdaev stays on my panel. Dr. Dmitry Pozdaev is the head of UNCDF in Uganda and regional advisor for Southern and Eastern Africa. He's worked with the UN system, UNCDF particularly, since 2010, and has produced quite a number of reports here in Uganda and elsewhere. So, Doctor, very nice to have you on the panel.
Thank you so much.
Of course, the Honorable Minister doesn't need a lot of introduction. The Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives, the Honorable Amelia Chambade, Member of Parliament, is also staying with us on the panel. I'm going to request you shortly to launch the report so that we discuss it after it has been launched. I would like to introduce with us here Mr. Adolfo Cires Alonso. Is that the correct pronunciation? Will do for now. Alonso is working with the European Union delegation in Uganda. He's the Finance and Agribusiness Program Manager. Very nice to have you once again. Mr. Gideon Badagawa. Mr. Gideon Badagawa is Executive Director at the Private Sector Foundation, Uganda. At the extreme end, I have Millie from Uganda Revenue Authority. Okay, I've been having trouble with that. Yes, Millie Nalukwago is Assistant Commissioner, Research, Planning and Development at the Uganda Revenue Authority. At the back here, you've met, I've already introduced Dr. Yusuf Kiwala from Makerere University, and I have also introduced Joseph Nkandu, who is the Executive Director at the National Union of Coffee, Agribusiness and Farm Enterprises, NUCAF, to join us here. So can I have the Minister?
I think we should two more that will...
Yes, I will introduce them as soon as I'm notified that they're joining us via whatever link we are able to get them to join us. So please use the hashtags that I've provided, and we'll provide WhatsApp and other channels that you can share with us and give us feedback from wherever you are about your own experiences, but speaking to this report. Can I ask the Minister to do the ceremonial launch of the report, maybe, so that we discuss it, and then we'll have the photo moment after everything else for our audiences out there.
So how do I, is there a ceremony? Yes, okay, dear listeners and the distinguished panel here. As we all know, our economy is premised on MSMEs. So a study like this, it will be very, very important for the recovery of our economy after the COVID-19 pandemic. I, therefore, would like to launch the Uganda business, so long as we observe the SOPs. I therefore would like to launch the Uganda Business Impact Survey 2020 and the study on the impact of COVID-19 on the Ugandan micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. So I've launched it now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Honorable. Thank you.
Okay, it's mine now.
It's yours now.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Now that the report is launched, we can fully constitute our panel and have a discussion into it. Right to begin with, when businesses struggle, government will also struggle with its revenues. We just had the national budget presented, at least passed by Parliament. The formal presentation will still await for next month. I think other member countries of the East African community have adopted different budget presentation programs, unlike in the past before COVID, when the presentation will be on the same day. So I would like to start with Millie from Uganda Revenue Authority to just give us, I know you did this in collaboration, you and CDF worked with both Makerere University and Uganda Revenue Authority to prepare this report, but to give us a perspective of how you're looking at things from where you stand as the revenue collector. You can do it from there. If you have a microphone, you can come and do it from here, whichever makes you more comfortable. I'll give you about 5 minutes.
Is there a clock? So thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you all our listeners and my fellow panelists, Honorable Minister, and the researchers. I thank you for this opportunity for us to work together collaboratively, because that's the way to go in also this COVID times. This report was very important for us at the Uganda Revenue Authority because of the uncertainties on how our businesses are being affected by COVID. Yes, it's been said that this is what we live, but we needed to get the numbers, to get the feel of what it's like. I'll quickly speak to a number of proposals that have been given by our small and medium enterprises. We appreciate that these enterprises are going through a lot, and indeed, when we look at our monthly filing ratios for these enterprises, these have dropped to about 55% vis-a-vis the targeted 75%. That's in the month of April. And payments from our small and micro, the ones we call presumptive, in the month of April have dropped from 600 million the same month last year to a meager 24 million this month of April. So you can see that these businesses are really struggling. What the URA is looking at is, like has been discussed here, is that it's important that these companies get financial support so that we boost demand during and after the COVID to be able to pick up consumption and then the revenues. Because for sure, government needs these revenues to boost the economy. Government has also been impacted, so it needs the revenues to boost the economy. So it has to be a full package, a full chain across. On the side of URA, a number of proposals have been given, and indeed, like the minister mentioned, there's a task force that is having various discussions to see what is the package that Uganda will give. I'll just talk about the rescheduling of filing dates as one of the proposals, and what we have put as Uganda Revenue Authority is that for those companies that file on a monthly basis and are expected to file by 15th of the month, for example, by 15th of May, they've been given an opportunity to file by the end of May, an extension of 15 days, and those who have filed by that time will not suffer penalties and interest. So that is our effort to handhold these companies. We've also rescheduled payments. Yes, you may file and you do not have liquidity to pay there and then. So we've given you an opportunity to approach the Uganda Revenue Authority and reschedule your payments, come up with a payments schedule, and this provision has been given up to June 2020, because we know that companies are not being able to access. Those who are expected to file on an annual basis, corporation tax and their annual taxes, the ones whose filing date was due in September 2019, their accounting date is September 2019, and filing date by March 2020. These have been given an extension up to end of May 2020. Why are we looking at those dates? Because COVID is very interesting, is that you keep having various shifts. So we are also looking at, depending on how the situation is, if there's an extension in lockdown, then we would also extend. If there's no extension and business is up and running, then we would also get to our taxpayers. Another thing I'd like to mention is at URA, or tax is only due when you make income, and tax is only due when you make profits. So for the companies that are experiencing challenges in generating revenues or profits, the tax methodology is automatic, is that if you haven't earned income, for example, if your tenants are not paying you rent for 2, 3, 4 months, then it is expected that in your return that income will not show, and so there will be no tax due. So it is kind of an automatic amnesty, is that it works out itself. We know that if you have less employees and you're paying less salaries, then definitely the pay-as-you-earn that you have to pay will also not be as much as you needed to pay. So it's important that we have that accounting policy so that we are able to benefit on the methodology of the taxes. I would also like to talk a bit about the startups that came through in the research. And we also have packages. We have packages in the tax rates that support startups, that support small and medium enterprises. We have rates which are similar to the local government rates, and these are rates that support small and medium micro enterprises whose turnovers are below 50 million. So if your turnovers are below 50 million, we have grades where if you're between 35 but you don't exceed 50 million, there are grades within Kampala, within municipalities, and within towns and trading centers. So I take this opportunity to educate the micro enterprises that do not struggle with paying the taxes, do not struggle with looking for an accountant that will increase your cost of doing business. is that we have those rates whereby if you're in a municipality, you can pay as low as 100,000 depending on your turnover. If you are in Kampala and you're a garage, you can pay as low as 300,000 depending on your turnover. So take time and visit our website, and all these rates are available for you to take advantage of. So if you are a bit higher than the level of 50 million, we also have another nurturing package which considers those who are between 50 million to 150 million, and that gives you it gives you a base whereby you pay, for example, if your gross turnover is between 50 million but does not exceed 75 million, then you pay 937,500 shillings, or 1.5% of your gross turnover. So I'll not go through the whole detail, but this is all available for you. Is that we also know from research that businesses take approximately three years to be able to make profits. So if you elect to prepare accounts, then if you're not making profit, you'll not pay tax. Just ensure you keep your books, and we will not tax you if you are not making profits, because we only tax profits. If you elect to be within this presumptive regime, that's where we look at gross turnover, where you probably do not have an accountant, you're not skilled to the level of putting books of accounts together. So in conclusion, I believe that it's important that we work together with government to increase the liquidity of these companies. I don't know how, because government is also looking at URA to finance, because whatever is coming through from donor funding and what is really not going to sustain as much. So it's important that, like the minister said, as we look at the boo-boo, it's important that we also be able to sacrifice to support our nation. How do we get a win-win? How do we move on the side of financing the businesses, boosting demand, consumption, and generating the revenues that will boost our economy? So as the Revenue Authority, we are committed to support you go through this phase, through extending the filing, extending the payments, and considering that if you've not made income, then you do not have to pay the tax. So please, if you have any people out there who are charging you when you know you haven't made profits, our offices are open, and our website is available. We have the online connections, and please get in touch with us and you will be supported. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Millie. That sounds like sweet music to many Ugandans out there, because I think their relationship with the tax collector normally is not that. But if you say you're going to hold people's hands, the hand of businesses to manage through this this period, that sounds really, really nice. Let me come to a very quick comment from Alonso Adolfo from the European Union. From where you sit, how are you looking at the situation there? You have a microphone on you, so you can sit and speak from where you are. How are things there? Because when things get tough here, we're going to look to friends beyond here. Over the last 2 months, some money has come through in loans from the IMF, from the World Bank, from a number of European countries that have extended help. But there is an appreciation that things are not going well there either, because there's a global pandemic. So for a Ugandan business person watching the launch of this report, looking at the struggles their own businesses are going through, can you make a quick comment to the report itself first? And
well, first of all, let me congratulate the UNCDF and Makerere University for putting this analysis together, because for all the people that we are sitting here, the government, the ministry, the URA, development partners, private sector foundation Uganda, for all of us it's very important to have data. Data that tell us where to move from and what to do. I would say some of the data that is coming is quite hard in the sense that many companies seem to maybe close if the situation doesn't change quickly. A lot of lays off of companies. So the situation is hard, but it's also not new. I mean, it's something that I think all of us we are seeing during the last weeks, and it's quite hard to see what is happening in the private sector, but it's the reality on the ground. Maybe before I go into what we are planning to do related to COVID-19, let me also share with you what the European Union delegation has been doing in the last years on supporting private sector, and maybe also focus on SMEs. I think the colleague from Makerere University has been mentioning that the report is focused on micro, small and medium enterprises, and then when I went through the report, you can see that actually almost 95% of the companies that responded are having a turnover of maximum 200 million shillings, approximately $50,000. Turnover means income per year. So we're talking about those kind of companies that have maximum $50,000 income per year, and that is actually the kind of companies that we have been trying to support. And for these companies that have this kind of turnover or this kind of income, capital is very important. And for all the companies, but also for this kind of small companies is even more important. Capital is like air for a human being. And our colleague from Makerere University also mentioned that some of them maybe, if they don't have income or they don't have some kind of capital from the financial institutions in the next months, they will not survive, because you don't have air, you don't survive. So from the European Union in the last years, a couple of years, 3 years, we have been working on more and more supporting this kind of companies, this kind of size of companies on access to finance. The banking sector in Uganda has some structural issues. We know that in terms of private sector credit compared to the GDP of the country, in Uganda we're talking about around 15%, when some other economies like China, some of the European countries, eventually also the US, have a percentage of around 120% of private sector credit to GDP. That means that there is a lot of capital and a lot of money that reach companies that allow the development of the country. And again, going back to the survey, 70% of SMEs provide 70% of GDP in Uganda. I mean, they're so important. And if we don't provide capital to those companies, then eventually we'll have a problem. But we have been trying to support this access to capital for SMEs in the last years. From the banking sector, our main partner has been the Uganda Development Bank. Actually, we have an ongoing program in which UNCDF and European Union, we are partnering to support UDB to provide more credit to small companies in the agribusiness sector. We also have a kind of number of consultants that are supporting UDB in increasing their capacities to lend. So we recognize the importance of having this private sector credit to SMEs, and we have been working now for a number of years on that. Eventually, we also working on capital markets. I mean, capital markets means access to longer-term capital for companies, because banking sector here provides kind of loans that they are not very long time. Sometimes they are focused more on working capital, but many companies, they need capital expenditure, they need capital investment, they need that capital that will allow them to grow with a kind of medium long-term perspective. So in 2017, together with our partners, IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, we set up investment fund, also with co-invested by NSSF, and then we try to provide longer-term capital to the agribusiness sector as well. And again, for companies that they are in that bracket of small, medium enterprises. So we have been realizing the importance of capital, and now, and today, and you can see also coming from the survey, the companies are requesting that kind of financial support more. I mean, in terms of maybe renegotiation of loans or extension of or the repayment periods, And that is actually what we are trying to do with the programs that we are running now, because
someone will ask is, what is the turnaround time? Because what you're dealing with, the very first finding in the executive summary of this report is the fragility of these businesses. The planning in 2017, in 2018, in 2019 was looking at strong, healthy startups that can grow. Now you're dealing with companies that are drowning and are putting out a hand for you to hold them. So the situations are completely different. And the question is, if one of the members of Gideon Badagawa's foundation is struggling, one, to keep alive because they are stuck in Kampala, they can't move their goods, they can't get their workers into the workplace, so they're having to cut staff, they're having to cut everything. They're looking at this enterprise they had put in $40,000, $50,000, and it's not functional at the moment. What can they do? What do you tell them?
Okay, you was asked to go something more concrete. Well, let me also come back to what happened in the month of March, that it has been a kind of very important milestone for the government of Uganda, for the European Union delegation here, for private sector. Just a couple of weeks before the lockdown, we had the launching of the Sustainable Business for Uganda Forum that is composed by the government of Uganda, the Minister of Trade is part of it, Private Sector Foundation Uganda is also part of it, where Gideon also can express his own opinion about it. The European Union delegation, Ugandan companies, European companies, we all got together. His Excellency, the President, came for the launching of the forum and the platform. That means that from the month of March we have a structure that will allow some of these already existing programs on access to finance, together with the Private Sector Foundation Uganda, with all the companies and the Ugandan companies that are members of the foundation. We are working on how to address all these issues, how to use some of the existing programs, either by renegotiation of loans, either by increasing the percentage of matching grants that some of those companies are already getting. And I would say additionally to that, now, together with the Uganda Development Bank, we are working on a specific product for the tourism sector that you can see in the analysis and in the report that has been one of the most hit sectors for the COVID-19 because they don't have income. They have a lot of payments to do. So we're working on a specific financial product for them that will address some of these issues of not being able to have an income, but also having a number of expenditure to cover.
Thank you. Gideon, let me come to you. Does this report, in your view, speak to you and your members? This survey, does it speak to you?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Charles. And I really want to thank Honourable Minister and the team up here for I think a very well thought out representation of the thinking of the private sector, especially during this crisis, but also what we think post the crisis, because that's even going to matter more than the immediate interventions that we are doing now. How resilient the economy is going to be, how sustainable businesses and investments are going to be, will actually be dependent more on the stimulus package that we are trying to define here now. So I really want to appreciate this cooperation. I think there could have been no other time for us to have strengthened our cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships with the EU and UNCDF than now. We know that even at home, they have their own problems, and in fact, they have been hard hit more by the pandemic than probably we have. But they chose to work with us, and we cannot take that for granted. We really want to thank and appreciate EU and the UNCDF and the government of Uganda for this collaboration. And as private sector, really I want to say that the collaboration since the pandemic started has been very fruitful. The dialogue, the engagements that we have had with the government. There are quite a number of things that we have put across to government. All these things that we are putting across in this report have actually been listened to by government. Domestic areas, taxes, the entire stimulus package as you know it. You know, and again, one of the things that this pandemic has revealed to us is the level of preparedness in the area of import substitution. And I really want to add my voice, Honorable Minister, to thank you and the rest of government and Parliament for the job well done yesterday on the local content bill, because it was passed. And that's what we've been waiting for. We've been shouting about Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, because until we are able to build the capacities for our own enterprises, you cannot talk about sustainable jobs. You can't talk about sustainable exports. You know, the taxes and so on and so on. So the tax base, if you are going to expand our tax base and build resilience in the economy and make our economy more sustainable, we must focus more on the SMEs.
Let me just ask you to go back to that struggling SME. The report says only about 15% of surveyed companies can sustain more than 3 months of operation in their current cash flow. And what does this mean? Depends on when. I wanted to ask Dr. Chiwala, when did you begin counting the 3 months? When these companies were responding? Is it in the month of April when you're doing the survey? And what does that mean? Because if they started struggling in March or in February, February, March, April, it means by May,
yes,
they're getting out of business. If this is responding to April, May, June, then you're giving them an allowance. And this obviously depends on how longer. No, not just the lockdown. Just yesterday, I think they were reporting the highest increase in infections globally, I think about 100,000 overnight reported because of opening up in certain economies. So if you're looking at these 3 months, you have companies that are already struggling or getting
yes,
out of business. So I'd like you, Gideon, to speak to that company. They
now,
could be your
let
member,
me give you the scenario. Let me
membership.
give you the scenario,
Yes.
Charles. Before COVID, we had most of our companies up to 80% struggling around 50 to 65% of their capacity being utilized, not 100%, for several reasons: market, cost of energy, all this. So only 50 to 65% of their capacity were being utilized. Remember when we closed Rwanda, we closed DR Congo, there are challenges in South Sudan and so on. Companies were confined only to the local market. And you know what the purchasing power is like here. So capacity utilization came down even before COVID. Now, after COVID, and we have done a business barometer, we also at the private sector, which has been mirrored against this report. Companies now are operating between 20 and 25% capacity because they can't export, they can't import raw materials, so they have literally almost shut down, except recently when His Excellency now opened up and said maybe the wholesalers can offtake and so on and so on. So that gives you the scenario. When a company projects its cash flows, within 2-3 months, if the status quo continues, then they will not be able to pay their staff. And that speaks a lot to business collapse. So the question of rentals, can they be able to pay their rent? Can they be able to service their loans? Can they be? These are issues that really touch the business out there in trade and commerce, in agri-business, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. Are they able to service their loans? And the challenge that we now have in town is about these two things. You'll be told by anyone, any trader around town here, these are the two things that are bothering them. I have been sitting for the last 3 months. Can I service my loan? Can I pay the landlord? Can I do the, and these things speak to the operational cost of that business. So when you do projection of the cash flows, literally businesses cannot stand.
Okay. Doctor, can I just have you come in quickly? The 3 months, would you be able to do a projection? The tentative date for a little bit broader opening up is 26th May, which is next week. But then the president said like public transport and other things will come 4th June. Are you able, maybe using this study to project and say, we did this study in April, but if this continues beyond June, July, what does this mean? Could you just, if you could use the microphone here.
Thank you very much, moderator. When you look at the speed, and I must emphasize the speed at which the impact of COVID gets into farms and the inside of farms, it is so fast. What does that mean? That while we estimate that within these 3 months, about 50, for example, 50% in the informal sector would not be actually having work. That means that that if we have that pushed forward beyond the 3 months, okay, then it means more disaster, I must say. I cannot right now say by what percent, but you see that 50% in just 1 month. You see the impact. Now, what happens if it goes beyond 3 months? It must be worse. It's like a tsunami. Expect the disaster if it goes more than that.
Mr. Nkandu, can I have you come? The minister wants to come in, but if you could just hold in for a minute. Let me have from the coffee sector. If you have major disruptions in the tourism sector, which competes with FDIs directly in terms of our forex, the next thing you're going to look at is coffee, for example. Does this report speak to you, and what is the situation from where you stand? If you could just come to the microphone here.
Thank you very much, Charles. I want also to, first of all, add my voice to appreciate the findings from the report by UNCDF and Makerere University with the support of European Union. This report speaks, to us practically. I want to tell you from just a very practical point of view that as No Cafe, first of all, if you can look at the entire coffee value chain where we operate, and if I could move to the end of the value chain within the country, we had a coffee shop, and there are many other coffee shops. They had to close. And therefore, the staff are at home. 90% of my staff are at home. The coffee shop is closed, among others of other, colleagues in the same industry. Beyond Uganda, and where mostly Uganda exports its coffee, and that is to the European Union, and more particularly Italy, where for quite a long time we've been selling our coffee. They closed before us. And you find that we had upgraded in the value chain, and whereby upgrading that we went beyond the intermediaries to the roasters who sell coffee to the cafes, restaurants, and hotels. Those hotels, cafes, restaurants closed. And therefore, the demand, had to halt all during this time. And therefore, even the shipments that we had to be rescheduled for the future. Now they are beginning to come back. And this is when we are supposed to be really in active business. But where is the capital? And you may look at many of our contemporaries, including ourselves, that we had moved into big capital investments. And time is already with us during the COVID period to pay back the money. And therefore, you are lacking working capital. You have shipments you have shifted, but again, you are not able, to actively bulk the necessary coffee for the export. 90% of your staff are away. So you can imagine, the kind of challenges that we are going through. We've been lucky that cargo has been moving, but if the demand side has been down, okay, And of course, to go further than the immediate effects that we see now, because this report has brought out the immediate effects. But I want to say there are long-term effects that are going to come out of COVID-19. I must say, EU had given us the opportunity of, exporting everything to EU, and everything but, arms. But I'm telling you, as COVID has come in, the issue of traceability, the issue of food safety are going to become more and more stringent to us. And therefore, we have to get back to our drawing, board and ensure that we tighten our belts. So that, long-term effect has to be looked at. And it is at this moment that really government had done a lot in supporting this very sector, the coffee sector, in terms of replanting and also providing for the opportunity for us to add value. But of course, even as these rains we have had, we've not been in a position to plant more as we try to aim for the 20 million bags that we have to attain by 2025 or 2030. Therefore, that now the Honorable Minister is here, I would like to request government to expedite the enactment of the National Coffee Law, which is actually was needed yesterday, because when we talk about traceability, when we talk about the stringent food safety requirements that will be needed for our continued presence in our major markets, then we needed that national coffee law yesterday. So, Honorable Minister, it is our humble request from the coffee industry. Probably, Charles, last but not least, I think this COVID-19 calls, for us to really look at restoration and reconstruction of our businesses, of our economy, and we needed to bring, social enterprises that really speak to the human face, such that they play a much more role in a wider context of creating impact in the society beyond, profit beyond profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kandu. Honorable Minister, you wanted to come in, so you can come in now. I'll have a couple of questions for you as well, but first shoot from where you are. Okay, you can. No, I need you to go ahead and respond, because you wanted to respond.
Okay, I want to respond to a number of issues.
Yes,
here.
sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
You can do it from where you are.
Can I do it from there?
No
because
problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yes, thank you very much, moderator, listeners, the distinguished panel, my colleagues here. I would like to paint a scenario of optimism with facts. I really feel for the micro and small enterprises. And I've taken note of the issues they have raised. But I've also like to point out a number of issues here. First of all, we know very well that as much as the private sector is ailing, government is also ailing financially. Fortunately, we have the officer from Revenue Authority, because that's where we get all the resources from. The economic shrinkage, of course, will cost sub-Saharan Africa between 3.7 billion to 37 billion to 79 billion in loss in loss of output. But the economic growth is projected to decline, for example, Uganda, from 6% to probably 3.5%. But I wanted to point out that as much as we're going through COVID, cargo was flowing and trade was going on. For example, in exports in January, we exported 383.62 million US dollars export. We're exporting coffee to Algeria. We're exporting tea. We're exporting a number of manufactured goods within the region. And by February, the exports, of course, had gone down to 352, and I presume that now they've gone lower because of the interruptions that have come in, especially when we're taking measures against COVID, the testing and the medical issues. The imports have continued. For example, in January, there was 711.9 million US dollars. We're importing steel, we're importing wheat, we're importing raw materials, we're importing machinery. And March, of course, it had gone down 593.7. Essential commodities have been available on the market. The shops, for example, in the malls and the kids and the shops that we have, were taken by surprise. It was a shock when they announced that we close businesses. So all their stock is definitely still in the shops. The challenge is rent, access, and definitely the other one will be low purchasing power, because people will not have enough money to buy. So the situation might not be as dire as sometimes we portray it to be, except the informal. Informal might have issues. Those who are in the informal sector. Another issue I wanted to point out is that as much as I've looked at the challenges by the private sector from the presentation. Rent, but there is a provision in the law, housing law, that what is important is the relationship between the landlord and the tenant. As much as government tries to intervene, the most important transaction of this relationship is their relationship between the landlord and the tenant. Landlords, some of them have not demanded for rent, others have demanded. But I think the onus is also upon the tenants. The tenants to form an association and negotiate with the landlords on better terms. Government might dictate, but this is private sector. The landlord would argue, I borrowed my money, and I know where I borrowed my money from, and the banks want money. So for us, our intervention would be through negotiations with the bank, but through central bank. Remember, even these other banks are private. They're also surviving on businesses. They are privately owned. So our control is on the central bank to implore the private. For example, now central bank reduces CBR. But the private banks have not reduced their interest rates. But they've started negotiating. Still, there is a relationship between the creditor and the bank. So they must also form a rapport between them. Another issue I wanted to point out, but now when you talk about the financial services, 15 out of 25 banks are also at risk. 15 out of 25 are also at risk. So, and their annual growth is projected to decline from 7.4 to 4%. So now what are the lessons learned? Because I'm going to be very brief in this. Of course, we have noticed that the informal sector is broader than we anticipated. And we are trying to work retrospectively to see that we register them, URSB to reduce its costs, because it also has costs, and for us to engage more, MSME departments to engage more with the informal members of the informal sector. And I think that has emerged. E-commerce is going to be the mode of doing business in future, because that one also has emerged that everybody has a phone. Even someone selling bananas, matoke, in the market is also using a phone to ensure that the banana gets to the customer. But there also have been opportunities during this time. African Continental Free Trade Area, that one we have to strengthen because it's going to be a market for us. I know Europe has had issues and it will be in recession for some time, we must admit, because it has been had badly hit. Another one is that new innovations have come on the market. Yes, I'm going to. So the moderator wants to know, or people, or listeners would want to know, what is government going to do for us? Government, of course, is going to capitalize UDC and UDB. Government is going to strengthen skilling. We have to roll out skilling for everybody, especially the youth, the demographic dividend. Capitalization of UDB to be able to cater for the micro and small enterprises rather than the only medium. Step up the programs that we had, youth livelihood, women livelihood, but there is also another cluster program that is going to cater for clusters, border borders, this is under microfinance, border borders, saloon, and give them a revolving fund of 30 million. That one is already on track. And all the districts, 30 million per cluster, border border in every district. And that one will help them to recover. That's why I've been appealing to the border borders, not all to return to the city, but also benefit from the programs that are down there. But the private sector also has a role. Let us link the retailers to the manufacturers, because that link is not there. Let us strengthen that link to the manufacturers, but also the academia. Value addition is also key. Traders should shift maybe to services industry and also production. I had a list, but informal sector will be supported, but they also have to form themselves in cooperatives and circles, because microfinance has affordable credit for them to be able to do their businesses. So I'd like to say that recovery, for me, my anticipation is that recovery might be maybe between 3 to 6 months. What is important is for us to open up. And the earlier the better, as one of my colleagues said here in the panel, the earlier the better, so that the impact is not stretched. The banks also have to, the banks, even though they are also doing business, but they also have to consider restructuring credit facilities at the request of the clients. But clients should be mindful that you don't stretch it, because the business earns more. As you stretch the restructuring period, the bank earns more than you do. But banks should not impose default penalty charges on missed standing orders. Savings of women groups should be protected. They should not be taxed. Banks should not impose any charges on them. So these are some of the requests, but traders also have to work very hard to formalize their businesses. Otherwise, it will be difficult to benefit from the programs that government has. Forward and backward linkages with manufacturer is key. Cross-border trading is very important because the essential commodities are there. And mind you, they will give you favorable terms because people have no purchasing power to purchase the essential commodities in the industries that have continued manufacturing throughout this period. So you are able to sell your products across borders under the regional integration. So I'd like to paint a more optimistic scenario. The advantage is that now we have the figures, the data. The data will help us to restructure, reorganize, look out for the members of the private sector who need support and link them to the necessary institutions or organizations that are there to support them. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Though I think many people would have been waiting to hear, is there a specific stimulus package that I don't know if I'll get from you today? And unfortunately, I'm constrained for time. Is there thinking to put money in the pockets of Ugandan consumers to be able to spend in this economy so that they can stimulate?
Ugandan consumers, it's a bit difficult.
It's a bit difficult.
It could be, what I forgot to talk about is that there is, at the moment, there is a committee, high-level committee that is discussing all this. But the Ugandans will benefit from indirect favors, not directly. Of course, they will not give money to each and every one. But it will be indirect. For example, taxes, Revenue Authority would say, we are lifting a tax from this item. Or government will say, we are lifting charges from this. I mean, we'll look at selected areas which impact on ordinary Ugandans and at least relax some of the taxes or some of the charges, but that I cannot pronounce myself on now, but we are trying to look at that.
Okay, and then I'll throw something quickly to Millie there. Millie, you have, we have a budget of 45.4 trillion Uganda shillings. We expect you to raise at least 21 trillion, is it? Where does that money come from? With these realities, where does that come from? If you could use, I have about 3 minutes to end this show, by the way, to end this launch.
We started late.
Use a minute, yes. Yeah, we already stretched into the hour. Just use about a minute.
A minute. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Of course, we expected to collect about 21 trillion according to that budget that was passed. But like I said, with COVID, situations keep changing. And like the minister has said, discussions are taking place. And we are looking at the impact of COVID on revenue. And we might have to reduce what amount is expected. I can't give the final figure right now, but I'll just say that of that 21 trillion, included the 300 billion of revenue generating measures that the parliament did not pass. So you'll see that that will have to decrease, meaning that the other side of the budget has to be discussed again, given the COVID situation. And of course, with people's liquidity down, we do not expect much, but we will do our best because government is looking at Uganda Revenue Authority to mobilize revenues to pick up this economy. Thank you.
Thank you. I have under a minute, but and I apologize to Mr. Talib Lubega, a treasury manager at Uganda Development Bank, I think. Yeah, Uganda Development Bank Limited. Should have been joining us by telephone link, but we're very much squeezed for time. I'll just smuggle in a question or a comment. You don't have to respond to it, Honorable Minister. It's from Joseph Biekwaso, and he says it's for the Minister. It says, we operate a private school. This is semi-rural and semi-urban, located in Bulenga, and school fee structure is about 600,000 shillings for boarding. So our target are parents of medium income. It says, we have not paid teachers since March when the schools were closed down. We have not yet laid off the workers, but the salary bill is accumulating. It's 3 months and we do not expect to open soon. Unfortunately, we have been told by government not to lay off workers. When schools eventually open, Teachers and other workers will demand their salaries. Certainly they will not be in a position to pay, even in installments. Can the Honorable Minister of Trade or any other discussant recommend to us a possible solution to this very serious challenge? Can government intervene, since education is key to the future of Uganda? Do you have a quick answer for Byekwaso, Honorable Minister?
Well, Mr. Byekwaso, you're running a private school. Well, it all goes back to the relationship you have with your teachers. We could negotiate as soon as they open. You could negotiate with them and find a way of well, laying down might be a bit complicated, but you could find a way of paying them in probably in installments. It's because everybody has gone through this. We are all subjected to this. It's something that we never planned for. You didn't plan for it. Government didn't plan for it. But maybe somebody else would advise.
Okay.
But
I think you've given the answer in a way. Kayondo Joseph, I think your question was answered. The Nunda Kelvis, from Miller URA, she has just spoken. I think she speaks directly to what you're asking, because you're asking for incentives from the Uganda Revenue Authority and how business can be helped to get back. Sansa Saleh says informal sector has been hit hard. Does government have any plans to revamp the majority population? If yes, will it cater for all or specific? I think the minister spoke to that. Unfortunately, we got to bring this to an end. We've been here, Honorable Minister, it's already 5:17 at the moment, so we extended beyond the time we should have finished. I'll just give a minute to Dimitri to just say in summary, you produced this report, you produced many other reports. Where next? I have also read a report from the Economic Policy Research Center of Makerere University, and it speaks almost to the same things as you're finding out here. The question for many Ugandans is that they will be anxious on what helps them to move forward. So if you could do that in a minute, then we'll close the launch. You could speak from where you are. Could use the mic.
Yeah, whichever way, since I'm... thank you so much to the Honorable Minister and to the distinguished panelists for covering a lot of ground, and in particular, thank you to the Honorable Minister for picturing this brighter picture and explaining what the government is doing to help the private sector. So in a way, it is already an answer to the question. Support from the government and a relief and economic stimulus package on which the government is working at the moment is that response which we hope to provoke and facilitate with concrete evidence that comes from this survey. But an important dimension of this situation, and the Honorable Minister also hinted at that, is what the businesses themselves do in this situation. What kind of initiative they take and what kind of solutions they look for. A business, by definition, involves risks. That is very clear. And not all risks can or even should be covered by the government. The responsibility of business is there. Quite a few mechanisms and facilities exist out there to support businesses in this situation. And Adolfo from the European Union has mentioned a few initiatives by the European Union. UNCDF has a few, many others. Of course, are working on supporting the private sector in this situation. But the ingenuity and the propensity to innovate within the private sector will be the decisive factor to deal with situations like this one.
I'd like to say thank you very much to you all. Thank you very much to the panel, Dr. Pozdaev, the Honorable Minister, Mili, Mr. Nkandu, Dr. Yusuf Chiwala, Alonso, Adolfo, and Mr. Badagawa. Thank you very much. Pardon? Unfortunately, time is against. Time is not my best ally. We've got to get out of here.
Okay.
But we'll continue the discussion. We'll continue the discussion through other forums. I'd like just to encourage the people who've been following us, both on TV and on other forums, to get the report for yourself and read it, internalize it, and continue the debate. In whichever other opportunities that we have. It is the Uganda Business Impact Survey 2020, Impact of COVID-19 on Formal Sector, Small and Medium Enterprises. It's available on the UNCDF website. The link has been on your TV screen, so pick it up or or go to the website directly and internalize the report and find where your entry point is. From me here at NTV, my name is Charles Mwangushampagi, and I would like to thank all of you for sparing the time to be with us. Have a good evening. Stay safe.